In John 12, 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Recall that Jesus had retreated to Ephraim after a trial had been called in, or a discussion had been had among the chief priests and the Pharisees at the Sanhedrin. Now, John's gospel basically has us coming directly from Ephraim, where his disciples had retreated, directly to Bethany. There's no mention of Jericho or any other place that Jesus might have visited on his way. But now we are at Bethany, where Lazarus lived and whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served. Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. And notice here, Lazarus is not standing up. He's not greeting the guests. He's not saying anything. He's just reclining at the table. And depending on how you read this, this might be very alarming because earlier in John 6:53 through 56, Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." For Lazarus to be reclining at the table with him, does not necessarily mean he's alive. It could, I barely want to say it, he might be something that they are serving. Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, and poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. That might especially be helpful if Lazarus was just reclining there at the table with them, rotting. Now, here's something interesting about Mary pouring this on Jesus' feet and wiping it with her hair. One is that in the previous chapter, they make this sound like a past tense thing. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. It's also interesting, Mark 14 mentions a woman in the home of Simon the leper. That's not Lazarus, I guess. She had a jar, she broke it open and poured the perfume on Jesus' head, not on his feet, but on his head. In Matthew, a woman came to Jesus with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head. And in Mark, while he was in Bethany, in the home of Simon the leper, a woman broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. So we've got a general agreement. This event, the anointing, happened in Bethany, but in John's Gospel it's the feet, while in Matthew, Mark, and Luke it's the head. The house was, in John's Gospel, it was Lazarus' house. In the other Gospels, it was Simon the leper. The person who was christening the Christ in John's Gospel was Mary. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it was an unnamed woman. Unidentified, I mean. Next, let's look at the objector. One of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. So in John's Gospel, the objector was Judas Iscariot. In Mark, it just says some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wage, and the money given to the poor." In Matthew, when the disciples saw this, they were indignant. All of the disciples said, "Why this waste? This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor." So in John's Gospel, only Judas Iscariot objected, but in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, some or all disciples objected that she poured out this perfume. Okay, the next thing comparison is the motivation of Judas Iscariot. One of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" And this says nothing about Judas Iscariot's motive. Mark 14, Judas Iscariot went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear and promised to give him money. Does not state what Judas' motive was. Okay, it looks like I made a bit of a mistake. Luke, there is a woman that pours oil on Luke's feet, and there's not a woman pouring oil on his head. So I need to make an entirely different column here for Luke, because first of all, this wasn't in Bethany, and I think it takes place in a town called Nain. And goodness, I've made a bigger mistake than that, because there is a man that he raises from the dead. It's just not, doesn't say that his name is Lazarus. It's interesting. John the Baptist sent you to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" And really, Jesus kind of, I think this is kind of an evasion of the question. Go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Now, this is a key sentence. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. So anyway, I gather since Jesus went to a town called Nain here, and then nothing, it doesn't mention that he moved anywhere, so he must still be in Nain when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. He went to the Pharisee's house, reclined at the table, and a woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came with an alabaster jar of perfume. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping. She began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. So in Luke, the part of the body was the feet. A sinful woman was the person that did this. The house was a Pharisee, and the objector was the Pharisee himself, but the reason that he objected had nothing to do with the poor. It was his disgust. He was disgusted at the woman. He said, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Now, note here that Jesus doesn't say that the Pharisee is a sinner. Um, he, he's saying uh, the woman has a bigger debt to be forgiven. He's actually seems to be suggesting that the woman is more of a sinner than the Pharisee sitting there. But he's also saying, whoever has been forgiven little loves little. A little bit that kind of reminds me of some of the twisted advice of Barabbas, because if someone is compelled, thinks that, oh, I can love God more if I just sin more, if I just accumulate more and more wrongs in my life so that I can be forgiven of more. I don't think that I don't think it works that way. On the other hand, this man who sees the woman touching him, and if you knew what kind of woman she is, that she's a sinner, you wouldn't want her to touch you. That might not come from uh, it, it's coming from a sense of right and wrong, a sense of morality, perhaps a sense of moral superiority, uh, where this man might not forgive himself for being who he is. He might be the sort of person that just accepts as given that humankind is evil, and he can't forgive himself for just being human. Something along that line. And this idea, who is this that even forgives sins? Um, do they, in principle, believe that humans cannot forgive other humans who have wronged them? All right, I'm getting way off the beaten track. Where was I? I was at I was with John and his buddies, Jesus and John and his buddies in Bethany. So it is interesting that John is the only one who decides he knows the motivation of Judas. So we make another row in our table, and in Luke, unless Judas was the Pharisee, he wasn't there at all. So that's a pretty big possibility. Was Judas Iscariot the same person as that Pharisee in Nain, where Jesus was eating? In Matthew and Mark, there was no speculation as to Judas' motivation. And in John's Gospel, says the Judas motivation was he was a thief. The thing is, whether they said whether he was a thief or not, there's this question of why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. Um, that is a reasonable question. If it comes from the mouth of the thief, that does not take away the validity of the question, but it does take away. It would take away the effectiveness of selling the perfume and giving the money to the poor, because if the thief takes the money or takes a large portion of it, then not as much is going to the poor. Here it says, "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." By the way, this is 6 days before the Passover, so it's not quite the day of his burial. This, of course, is breaking it out a little bit early then, but all right. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So Jesus was there in Bethany, where Lazarus lived, and the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. Just want to get one more map picture here. Nain is over here, just southwest of the Sea of Galilee. That's where Jesus raised, or in Matthew, Mark, Luke, in Luke 7, it said Jesus raised a young man from the dead. And here in Bethany, um, I guess this box is the size of Jerusalem and its surrounding area. And there's Bethany. So it's almost in the same dot where Jerusalem is. They're really close together. Bethany is like a suburb of Jerusalem. But both situations, in Luke 7, Jesus has a sinful woman uh, pour perfume over his feet. And here in Bethany, in John's Gospel, Mary pours perfume over Jesus' feet. And in Matthew and Mark, right, they go to Simon the leper's house. They don't mention Lazarus, but Simon the leper's house is also in Bethany, and that is where, and I don't think either of those say anything about raising anybody from the dead, but it does have a woman breaking a jar and pouring perfume on Jesus' head. Okay, so putting this together, John 11 is a different event than John 12. John 11 is the Mary whose brother lay sick, was the one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. And the woman he's talking about appears in Luke 7, a woman in Nain who had lived a sinful life that learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. In Luke 8, it says the 12 were with Jesus, and also some women were there who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. So if we read that right, John is saying that Mary Mary called Magdalene was the woman in chapter 7 to whom Jesus said, "Your sins are forgiven." 7 sins, the 7 deadly sins. So perhaps all 7 of her deadly sins came out, her 7 demons. Okay, so that was a little bit disorganized. I'm just kind of searching around, trying to find any kind of meaning that I can in this. Interesting to see where some things are at, where Bethany is compared to Ephraim, comparing it to the different Gospels. We have a couple of the Gospels having him going through Jericho, and we have this event of Mary taking a pint of nard and wiping his feet with her hair. The difference between Lazarus' house and Simon the leper's house. Are they the same? Are they different? We don't really know. There's a lot of mysteries. Nothing can be like really worked out for certain just by reading it, I don't think. But I do think there's enough ambiguity here to allow the possibility that there are 2 different stories going on. The story of Jesus of Bethlehem and the story of Jesus Barabbas, or Son of the Father.